Lunch with a Legend, the Lone Star Luncheon at the Texas Sports Hall of Fame, there was a bunch of burnt orange in that building to hear those two greats in Texas history. We're now joined by Shahan Jeyarajah, and one of the things that was brought up, Shahan, do you remember where you were? How old were you when they played that game against USC? You were still a kind of a young kid, weren't you?
Yeah, I remember it well. I was watching on the upstairs TV in our house, the smaller one, because my parents wouldn't let me watch in the living room. And I was going crazy. I was, let's see, I would have been 11, just about to turn 12 years old. I was in the 6th grade, and my 6th grade teacher at the time, because I didn't grow up in college football, was a huge college football fan, Mr. Perez. And so every single Monday during that season, we'd come back together and really get a chance to kind of talk about it and celebrate it and all that stuff. So that was a fun year. He had that newspaper up for the entire rest of the year of Vince running into the corner of the end zone. So I remember it well. I wish you guys had given me an invite. I would have loved to meet Vince and Coach Brown.
Yeah, they were there. I forgot to let you know that. That's my fault.
Yeah, you got to, you know what, you need to just.
Well, they didn't do a very good job of letting you know.
Yeah, Texas Sports Hall of Fame. I mean, like, you got to be on the media list or something like that. You're 90 miles away. You can be down here in just a second. So, Bear Bachmeier named the starting quarterback at BYU, a true freshman. What are your thoughts on his crazy journey from Stanford in the spring, coach getting fired there, Jake Retzloff leaving, and now he is the starting quarterback for a team that was 10-2 last year?
Yeah, it's crazy to think about, right? And just kind of emblematic of this new era of two potentially quarterbacks who technically started their careers somewhere else this spring be true freshman starters as transfers. But, you know, I love Bear Bachmeier being named the starter at BYU. And I especially love that he did it so decisively because they had two guys on campus in Trayson Borgett and also McKay Hillstead who had played games at the FBS level, at the Group of 5 level. So, like, we knew that they had a little bit of talent and experience on campus. For Bear to come in and immediately win over the starting job without much question, I think that says a lot about what he brings to the table. He, of course, comes from a great football family. His brother Tiger transferred with him from Stanford. His older brother Hank was a starting quarterback at Boise State, Louisiana Tech, and Wake Forest. And I think that it's not a coincidence that he has some great voices in his ear telling him how to handle this moment. So I've said really for the past week or two, if Bear's the starting quarterback definitively, I think it changes the way that I look at this BYU team. My big question with them heading into 2025 is, will they have upside on offense? Will they have explosion on offense? If they have a player like Bear Bachmeier in the lineup, I think they're much more likely to find it than with some of the other guys who maybe just haven't impressed at this point.
Shahan, are you yay or nay on a quarterback wearing the number 47 as Bear Bachmeier will be wearing this season?
I don't know how I feel about it. Now, I will say, talking to some folks around BYU, what they said about him is that he obviously grew up playing running back and linebacker, and he loves keeping that linebacker mentality, even at the quarterback position. I do love that. I do love a quarterback who isn't afraid to put his shoulder down and make you feel him. That said, it's going to be very weird when you see him dropping back. I remember a couple years ago, right, Devin Brown at Ohio State wore 33, and I believe it was in honor of Sammy Baugh, I want to say. Of course, there was the famous Devin Gardner. It was Devin Gardner, right, who wore 98.
Yep.
Like, it's always something to see these unusual numbers, but 47, that's a little bit of a different one. I feel like even these days, you barely ever see linebackers wear a number like 47 anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely. I was saying earlier, between first of all, the Bear, Tiger, and then brother Hank is just hilarious. The lore about this young man, he's wearing 47. He's got like this linebacker, fullback mentality. His brother, like, I don't know. There's like, I think if he plays well, the NIL will explode, and I think he's got like some real potential in Provo, especially as a true freshman.
No, I think so too. He comes from like I mentioned, a great family. They have a younger brother. I can't remember what his name is, but it's also animal themed. I don't know where Hank came from, to be quite honest, with being the eldest brother. Another fun fact, especially for people like me, he's the first Asian American quarterback over there. His mother is from Thailand originally, so I think he's going to be somebody that BYU fans and college football fans in general fall in love with. And they've already had a lot of fun with it on social media. They posted a lot of videos, sort of AI type things of Bears in a number 47 football jersey. So they're going to have a chance to, I think, really increase his brand. And, I think that BYU wants to rally behind a quarterback. They did last year with Jake Retzlaff and the whole sort of BYU movement. I think that Bear Bachmeier is kind of a natural successor to that.
Buck Bachmeier is the younger brother.
Man.
Yeah,
that's
Buck
crazy.
Bachmeier. Yeah, he'll be a freshman this fall in high school. So be on the lookout for him here in a few years. So you're a guy who wrote a lot about Texas Tech this offseason. We've all talked a lot about Texas Tech this offseason. And yesterday, they didn't get derailed, but they did get a dose of bad news with Quentin Joyner, expected starting running back in Big Portal Edition, being ruled out for the year. I know Joey McGuire commented on it just sucks this time of year to see guys getting hurt when we're so close. But your thoughts on the news, the potential impact, and how Texas Tech keeps it rolling regardless?
Well, he definitely wasn't the most important player on the roster, but I think that he was a very important linchpin into how they wanted to run their team. Talking to some people around that program over the offseason, they felt like Joyner was one of the most undervalued running backs in the country last year. They felt like he should have been used way more during his time at USC, and they felt like he had the upside of being a major NFL draft pick, of potentially being an all Big 12 type player. And I think that's where you lose the most, is that Quentin Joyner was a potential all Big 12 selection. The guys who are back there right now, they have two true sophomores who are going to be splitting snaps. I don't think have that upside. I think that they're going to be hoping for just above average running back play instead. And we saw this happen in a different way, of course, at Texas last year when CJ Baxter went out in the preseason with an injury. And they also lost a freshman, Christian Clark, to an injury as well. And just only carrying two true scholarship running backs, it limited what they were able to do at the position. And when you look at the way that Texas Tech built their roster, they want to be able to bulldoze teams. And Quentin Joyner's a bulldozer. I don't know that those other two guys are. So it's a complication for sure. Not one that'll derail the season, but one that I do think will matter.
Shahan, as we get close to Farmageddon overseas this weekend, has anything changed? Like, have you heard anything or seen anything that changes how you think this game's going to go between these two?
Not necessarily. I mean, these are two programs that are as well coached and that we know as much about as anybody in the conference. The big question, of course, on the Iowa State side of things, are they able to replace those two-star wide receivers who are both now with the Houston Texans? They feel really good about Chase Sowell coming over from East Carolina and Xavier Townsend from UCF. But even if those guys are borderline all Big 12 players, it could still be a step back compared to what they've been before. For Kansas State, on the other hand, it's kind of been rebuilding that offensive line. They lost 3 starters from that group, although they do return all Big 12 center Sam Heck. So, it's going to kind of come down to, is Iowa State better able to take advantage of Kansas State's rebuilding offensive line? Or is Kansas State able to really shut down that passing game? Because we know that Iowa State has not been a consistent running team since Breece Hall left for the NFL a couple of years ago. But I mean, this is going to be a very close game. Again, these programs don't make many mistakes, and I ultimately think it's going to be a last possession type of game in Ireland.
You like, I do. Georgia Tech, Florida State was conference. Northwestern, Nebraska was a conference. Do you like that these are conference games early on right off the bat?
I mean, this is probably one of the best week 0 games that we've ever gotten. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's perfect for the Big 12 in a lot of ways, because I mean, it's very rare, honestly, that you get a Big 12 game that everybody is tuning in for to this level. And I think that Iowa State versus Kansas State is going to be the kind of game where people stop and actually pay attention to week 0. So I do like that we have them. Now, I will say, if I'm an Iowa State or a Kansas State fan, I'm not loving very much of this, because with the way that the tiebreakers could work out, this could be a Big 12 title game elimination by the time that we get to November. And there's nothing worse as a fan than it being week 1 and your season's almost already over. Now, again, it's not going to be over, but you know what I mean. And so I do like having some conference games, but I do think that maybe you could err a little bit towards more of the upper class versus middle class than 2 upper class teams really putting it all on the line so early.
So we have, all these quarterback battles being decided across the country, and there were a lot of CJ Card at Notre Dame, Ty Simpson at Bama, Julian Sain at Ohio State, Joey Aguilar at Tennessee. A lot of there's probably one more I'm thinking of that the coaches were saying, man, this is coming down to the wire. They're so neck and neck. How many of those 4 do you think were down to the wire? And how many of them do you think were, that's just coach speak?
I do think that there was legitimate competition at most of them. I will say, I think that the one that was most down to the wire was Notre Dame. We had even been hearing that Kenny Minchey, the number 2 quarterback at Notre Dame, had been pushing for the job as recently as over the weekend, but ultimately they do go with CJ Carr. The others, I think that it was more decisive than some of these others, right? I think it was always going to be Julian Sain at Ohio State. I think that Ty Simpson was always the favorite, at least at Alabama. But I mean, there's a couple pieces of this, right? One, you want your quarterback battle to go into the fall because ultimately you want to keep both quarterbacks on campus and not lose either of them to the post-spring portal period. And I also think, too, that you gain a lot from having competition in your rooms. In fact, in some ways, I think that the past 2 or 3 years, teams have been too decisive in terms of, hey, we're just handing the job over to a starting quarterback. But one other dynamic that I want to pay attention to as well is that we're kind of starting to revert back to high school quarterbacks being the sort of preference for these teams. We had this moment of transfers constantly coming in and winning jobs and slotting ahead of guys who were in the middle of their development process. Well, I mean, again, Alabama now has a homegrown quarterback again. Ohio State has a homegrown quarterback again. Notre Dame has a homegrown quarterback again. I think that we're about to move back on that trend, especially as these 5th and 6th year quarterbacks start to age out of college football.
Last thing from me, you wrote about the younger quarterbacks, Mackenzie Milton, formerly of UCF, and now a guy that is getting into the coaching business. And your thoughts about him with a bullet on the way up?
Well, he's a figure that, of course, is so beloved at UCF for good reason. 2-time AAC Player of the Year, 27-6 as a starting quarterback. And I think that you can point kind of a direct line to Mackenzie Milton having his success at UCF all the way to UCF becoming a Big 12 program. And so, he's somebody that has gotten rave reviews from the people that he's worked with. The way that his career kind of worked out as a player actually, I think, benefited him a lot. He got to play under Scott Frost, Josh Heupel, and Mike Norvell. And I think he's taken pieces of all 3 of their systems forward. But, people really view him as somebody who has a lot of upside schematically and who is going to play a huge role in helping UCF figure out that quarterback position. So, there were 2 or 3 people that my colleague Chris Hummer kind of heard these might be potential future head coaches. Mackenzie Milton is definitely one that he heard that about multiple times.
I'll say this. I don't know if Jordan Travis becomes Jordan Travis without – I mean, look, Kenny Dillingham was there too. So he was also with Dillingham at that same time. And I don't know if Jordan Travis becomes Jordan Travis without Milton – there with him in the quarterback room in 2021, kind of encouraging him to kind of come out of his shell and become a quarterback because he wanted it to be move to receiver because it was too much for him. I would not be shocked just on reading your column and then everything else you hear about him if this guy's a 31-year-old head coach at maybe a bigger program than we expect.
No, 100%. I think that he has that skill set. You talk to him, and this is true of when he was a player too. He has a maturity, but beyond his years. He's one of the sort of next in line and great Hawaiian quarterbacks. He came after Mariota, before Dylan Gabriel, and I think that you just see a maturity in those guys because of what kind of Marcus Mariota instilled in them, I think, in a lot of ways. So I think that he's somebody who has great knowledge of the game, has great sort of perspective on life in the game. He was coached by his dad from the time that he was a young age, and to make it over to the States as a Hawaiian quarterback is not an easy thing. You don't get to go through the same camp circuits as everybody else necessarily because of the cost of travel. And so I think that he's handled that moment really well, and I think that these connections are going to pay off for him long term.
Shahan, thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. As always, you were on a lot of different places today and yesterday over the next, I guess, talking college football, which is great, and glad to have you when we do on Tuesdays at 4. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports, with us on 365 Sports. So we'll have that. Also around the corner, Steve Shaw, who's the CFO, National Coordinator of Football Officials. If you're in the chat room, if you're watching on Twitter, tag me at David Smoak and ask me about a football officiating or rules question. And Steve's going to update us on some of the ones that maybe are most misunderstood. How about feigning injuries and all of that, how they're going to handle that and much more? He will join us in the next segment.